Netanyahu rejects a US demand to halt settlement building projects in East Jerusalem. Are signs of tension emerging between Israel and the US over settlements? Could it develop into a major political breach between Israel and the United States? And what can both sides do about it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sahil Rahman. The Israeli leadership may be preparing for a face-off with the United States later this month. The issue of illegal Israeli settlements has reared its ugly head once more, bringing with it questions about Israeli authority over what it claims is legitimately annexed land. This time, the Obama administration is reported to be trying to intervene, but without success, as Bethan Howe reports.
This East Jerusalem building used to be a hotel. Now it's being demolished to make way for some more permanent guests. An Israeli company plans to pull it down and replace it with apartments. It's just the latest of many developments in an area that is still considered occupied territory under international law. But the Israeli government sees the situation very differently.
Let
me tell you that I'm trying to be polite here. I find it very strange to practice discrimination against the Jews and prevent them from buying or building homes anywhere, especially in Jerusalem.
Unified Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. Our sovereignty is non-negotiable, and that means that the residents of Jerusalem can buy apartments in any part of the city.
The Prime Minister was reacting to reports that the United States had requested that some construction projects stop in occupied East Jerusalem. This request could be seen as the Obama administration considering building in occupied East Jerusalem as part of the wider issue of settlements in the West Bank. This is a key point in the stalled peace process. The United States says settlement building must freeze. Israel says there must be an allowance for natural growth of the population in the occupied West Bank. US envoy George Mitchell will revisit the region and the issue later this month. And it's very possible that this controversial development could develop itself into a debate over Israel's control of the whole of occupied East Jerusalem. Bethan Howe, Inside Story.
Well, joining me are my guests today in Ramallah, Ghassan El-Khatib, Vice President for Community Outreach at Beretz University and a former Palestinian Authority Minister of Planning. In Jerusalem, Shimon Shetrit, Professor of Law at the Hebrew University and former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Also in Jerusalem, Jeffrey Aronson, Director of the Washington, D.C.-based Foundation for Middle East Peace and the editor of the report on Israeli settlement in the occupied territories. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Jeffrey Aronson, can I come to you first? Tell us what the difference is between Israel's definition of natural growth and settlement expansion in the occupied territories.
Well, there hasn't ever been an agreed upon understanding as to what natural growth actually means in a diplomatic context. The demographers will say that there are two ways to increase your population. One is births over deaths, and the other one is what they call internal migration. Historically, the Israelis have included both of these under the natural growth of the settlements in the occupied territories. The United States, for example, in the mid-90s, made some allowance for what it termed at the time natural growth of settlements without specifically defining it. George Mitchell, in his report after the beginning of the Second Intifada, called for a cessation of settlement expansion, including natural growth, again, without specifically defining it. So to a large extent, what natural growth is remains in the eye of the beholder.
Well, it might be said that the international community itself has never minced its words. Let's just bring our viewers up to speed with what the United Nations has said over the years. And resolutions on the Arab-Israeli conflict, Security Council resolution, for example, 446, adopted on March the 22nd, 1979, refers to the building of Israeli settlements in the Arab territories occupied under 1967. and says to the Palestinian territories of the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza Strip, as well as the Syrian Golan Heights, that the resolution determines that the policy and practice of Israel in establishing settlements in the Palestinian and other Arab territories occupied since 1967 have no legal validity and constitute a serious obstruction to achieving a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in the Middle East. Shimon Shetrit, former mayor of Jerusalem. Sir, United Nations resolutions, as we just said there, 476, 478, 497, and the one I just mentioned there, 446, all say that what Israel is doing is wrong. I just want to ask, what part of illegal do Israeli politicians not understand?
The Israeli position has always been that Jerusalem is part of the questions that will have to be resolved within the permanent negotiations for permanent solution. The Israeli internal law, as you just mentioned, or your reporter mentioned, views Jerusalem as integral part of Israel, and therefore it distinguishes between Jerusalem and the other territories. In the Oslo Accords, it is stated that Jerusalem is one of the issues that has to be decided in the permanent solution of the conflict between the Palestinians and Israelis. And therefore, you found there is a division of opinion here between what Israel has been practicing all over the years and what some have expressed either in resolution that you just mentioned. I don't know if there are the UN Security Council or UN General Assembly. If they are UN General Assembly, they have no legal binding force.
No, these are UN Security Council resolutions, sir.
Okay, so these resolutions have to be read in view of the Israeli interpretation of the 242 and 438 and the other resolutions that say that the permanent resolutions will have to recognize secure and recognized boundaries, and the Israeli position has been that Jerusalem is part of the issues that will have to be resolved.
Okay, well, let me just bring in Ghassan Al-Khatib here, because, I mean, even though we talk about Jerusalem, we really want to focus in, obviously, on these settlements and how that particular issue does impinge on Jerusalem as well. Ghassan Al-Khatib, you've heard what the former mayor of Jerusalem has had to say and what Jeffrey Aronson has said. How important is this current issue of settlement expansion, considering we have a new US Obama administration who wants to try and find a solution to the Middle East problems of the last 4 decades?
Well, first of all, Jerusalem is an integral part of the Palestinian occupied territories in the eyes of the Palestinians, the Arabs, the Muslims, the Christians, the international community, the international law, the resolution of the Security Council. It's only Israel that is insisting to look into Jerusalem in a way that is different from the way it should look at the rest of the occupied territories. Second, everybody, including recently the United States, have been saying that expanding settlements in the occupied East Jerusalem is equal in its illegality to the expansion of all Jewish illegal settlements in the Palestinian occupied territories, and there is no differentiation between the illegality of settlements in East Jerusalem or the rest of the occupied territories. It's true that the Oslo Agreement has postponed the negotiations over Jerusalem until the final status negotiations, but that should have happened 4 or 5 years ago anyhow. But in addition, and most important, regardless to when the final status issues should be negotiated, the parties are not supposed, according to the same accord of Oslo, the parties are not supposed to make changes in the situations of the kind that will jeopardize the final solution. It doesn't make sense and it's not legal, and it contradicts with Oslo Agreement that Israel, while waiting for the final status negotiations on Jerusalem, would be changing the reality in East Jerusalem in a way that would, practically speaking, determine the future of this part of the conflict that is supposed to be determined as a result of peaceful negotiations in accordance with the terms of reference of the peace process, and most recently in accordance with the roadmap that calls upon Israel to stop all kind of settlement expansion, including the natural growth and including in East Jerusalem.
Well, of course, I think there we've set really the scene for our viewers. We understand, obviously, the scenario of the binding agreements, non-binding agreements and the disagreements that have prevailed over 4 to 5 decades now. Jeffrey Aronson, let's talk about the dynamics now, the politicians involved and what they've got to try and sort out over coming days, months, years. The United States has for years walked the line and said the same thing. No action is required from Israel. Now Obama's administration does want action, and it wants it sooner rather than later. I mean, how much of a shift in policy is this if we compare this to the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, and before that maybe the Reagan administration?
Well, again, this policy has been enunciated in various forms over 4, almost 5 decades. So there have been changes and nuances that have changed the force and the impact of U.S. opposition. Suffice it to say that from the 70s through the Bush administration, Bush #2, there was a progressive diminution of U.S. formal and stated opposition to settlement expansion in general and to the harm that settlements were doing to prejudging the final status talks in particular. What the Obama administration is doing now is only referring to commitments that Israel made in the context of the Bush II administration, most notably in the roadmap, which dates from 2003, I believe. So the Obama administration has not adopted new policies. It's tried to win Israeli acquiescence to previous commitments made under the Bush administration. However, some of the language that it's using in describing settlement expansion brings to mind language that was most recently used in the administration of George Bush #1.
If you just hold that thought, the United States has long expressed opposition to increasing settlements, but has not moved much beyond rhetoric. President Obama has decided to change the direction of the game. His Secretary of State was very explicit in explaining what Obama meant.
The United States does not accept the legitimacy of continued Israeli settlements. This construction violates previous agreements and undermines efforts to achieve peace. It is time for these settlements to stop.
With respect to settlements, the president was very clear when Prime Minister Netanyahu was here. He wants to see a stop to settlements, not some settlements, not outposts, not natural growth exceptions. We think it is in the best interests of the effort that we are engaged in that settlement expansion cease. That is our position. That is what we have communicated very clearly, not only to the Israelis, but to the Palestinians and others. And we intend to press that point.
Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed to stop building new settlements, but not to halt what he called the natural growth of existing settlements, as we've just talked about, excluding occupied East Jerusalem. Now, last Sunday, US State Department summoned the Israeli ambassador and told him to halt one specific settlement project in East Jerusalem. Let's go back to our guests here. Ghassan Al-Khatib, one wonders what can be done in Israel, in Israeli courts as such, if the ball is in their court, what Netanyahu can do with what Obama is actually saying. What can he do?
Well, I think that Netanyahu can actually stop the expansion of settlements in accordance with the required American demands and with the requirements of the success of the peace process. And in this case, Netanyahu might lose. a little bit of his constituency in the right and among the settlers, but in the same time he will win segments from the center. And I think that his internal situations will be okay, because I believe that there is a constituency in Israel which is going to be happy for the progress of the peace process that will require definitely stopping the expansion of settlements.
Mr.
I think
Khatib,
that the Israeli public opinion...
I would say that's a very honest opinion, but surely one that, Mr. Shatrik, can I bring you in here from Jerusalem as well? Netanyahu is balancing a very fine line, or walking a very fine line. He's heading a government that's quite weak. He's got coalition partners, right-wing coalition partners, who are not willing to give any way to the Palestinians. So would you agree with what Mr. Khatib says, that he will certainly please the centre and the left and may lose a little ground? Surely his government would collapse if he gave way.
I tend to agree with your analysis and don't accept Mr. Khatib's explanation, not only because of political reasons. That is the constituency of Mr. Netanyahu has been one that has supported construction of housing and buildings all over Jerusalem, in the area of East Jerusalem. And whereas the policy in some periods of the Labour government, for example, the one I used to be member of in the cabinet of Rabin, it was the policy of Mr. Rabin not to allow construction of Jewish housing inside Arab neighborhoods. But this is not the policy of other governments, not the policy of the government that Netanyahu was leading. And this particular construction project, which is so close to the Hebrew University Mount Scopus campus, to the Central Command headquarters of the police and so on, it was a mistake on the part of Obama administration to pick up this particular project to send a message that they want the settlements to stop. I think it would have been much better.
But one of the other issues that
I'm
sorry to interrupt you, sir, but one of the other issues, Mr. Shatrik, that the current government continues to wave in the Obama administration's face is, like certain agreements. In 2004, Bush signed an agreement apparently with the then Prime Minister Sharon to hang on to certain settlement areas. I mean, the questions are raised as to, firstly, could President Bush do that? How would that affect future negotiations? Can I just bring Jeffrey Aronson in here? How problematic are these previous agreements and previous meetings, whether they were in Madrid or Oslo?
If the previous record is always something that the parties can discuss and maybe perhaps not even agree with, the real issue, however, is what is the current policy of the United States, and how is the government of Israel going to address that? To the extent that they take time reviewing the previous record and perhaps argue over whether oral commitments are enforceable or not, I think those are more in the realm of stalling tactics than actually coming to grips with the intentions of the current government in Washington, D.C. However, we'll have to see the extent to which the demands that the Obama administration is making upon Israel are maintained, and whether the energy and the force in favor of a compromise, which is being noted increasingly in both capitals, comes into play.
Mr. Khatib, can I bring you in here? I mean, one could say that from the outside looking in, Obama is looking for a fight with Netanyahu, perhaps one to show the Arab world that Israel, though an ally of the United States, doesn't control US foreign policy.
Well, Obama apparently have realized the interlinkages between the interests of the United States in the region in general and the need to bring the conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians to a peaceful end through negotiations. And that's what he is trying to do. And in this regard, I would say that there is an incompatibility between the settlement expansion process on the one hand and the peace process on the other hand. Because the peace process is about ending the occupation in order to establish two states, while the settlement expansion process is about consolidating occupation, which contradicts with the peace process and which has also a negative effect on the public opinion of the Palestinians and the Arabs. It proves the peace camp in Palestine wrong on the eyes of the public in Palestine and in the Arab world. And it proves the opposition to the peace process to be right in the eyes of the public. So the settlement expansion process is a vote and an action that contradicts with the peace requirements. And Israel has to make a choice whether they want the continuity of the expansion of settlements and the consolidation of this occupation, which will bring with it a continuity of the conflict and the violence and the suffering, or they want the peace, which would require ultimately ending the occupation, and as a prerequisite for that, and as an introduction to that, stopping the expansion of settlements.
Jeffrey Aronson, one politician recently said, I think it was actually President Obama, that he wants to work from the bottom up, and that even if, as Israel would like to engage some Arab states in the long-term peace process, you can't engage the Arab states within the region if Israel keeps coming up with surprises such as settlement expansion, taking more occupied land. I mean, these are problems that flounder at any sort of peace agreements or even talks.
Well, certainly, yes, it's a dynamic environment, and I'm sure there are many people in Israel in particular who are hoping that something occurs to change the subject and to divert U.S. attention elsewhere. However, it's important to note that if there is to be any sort of real confrontation between Israel and the United States, I think it would be far better for it to be over questions of settlement evacuation and final borders rather than over the issue of a settlement freeze. So I think the time is coming very near where the Obama administration has to redefine settlement freeze within a broader diplomatic context, which is highlighted by the question of settlement evacuation and drawing of borders.
Mr. Shatrit, I mean, are you surprised by the amount of focus there is now on the Israeli administration? Because for decades now, the Americans had always really put the pressure on the Arab community, on the Palestinians, to basically sort your house out, become unified, and then there is an opportunity for negotiations. I mean, the Palestinians still have to do that at the moment, but the focus really is on Israel at the moment, isn't it?
I think it is a mistake on the part of Obama administration to focus on isolated construction project in Jerusalem, which is supported by general consensus in Israel, and not to continue the dialogue which started between the two administrations, between the Obama and the Netanyahu administration, via the Minister of Defense and Governor Senator Mitchell, to develop some kind of a modus vivendi to solve this issue of what you call freezing the settlements in those areas, that it is accepted that we should do something about it as an Israeli society and community. Now switching the focus again to an isolated construction project, I think diverts the energies from the main thrust, that is to revive the peace process. And this message that the Obama administration is sending to the Palestinian side is, sit back, we will do the job for you, which is wrong, because the Palestinians, if they don't get their own house in order and develop some kind of unity, whatever the Obama administration would do would not move us even 1 inch towards the peace process.
Unfortunately, Mr. Shatrit,
for me, as a supporter of peace.
Unfortunately, Mr. Shatrit, I do have to end it there. We know that George Mitchell is heading to the region at the end of the month. Thank you so much to all of my guests there. Shimon Shatrit in Jerusalem, Hassan Al-Khatib in Ramallah, and Jeffrey Aronson in Jerusalem as well. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. We'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.